Hi, welcome to Africa in Perspective. My name is Zelda and I make videos about Africa from Mondays to Fridays. Today I'm going to be talking about a very common question that I've heard like a million times at this point. What would happen if Africa became one country? A lot of the times people propose this question, especially Pan-Africanists, and I see where they're coming from with the whole point of like, should Africa unite? Should Africa become one? We've been through the same things with colonialism. But today in this video, I'm going to keep it nice and short, 7 minutes. We're going to look at the real implications if that were to happen. The very first thing is, if Africa were to become one country, we would have 30.37 million square kilometers in terms of land. Can you guys imagine? Can you imagine the power? Can you imagine the influence? Okay, would be bigger than Russia, would be bigger than China, would be bigger than the United States, bigger than India, Australia, all these big countries with their big fancy schmancy GDPs. We would be very big compared to them. And I don't think it's a coincidence that all the countries that I've named are big in size as well as their population. So I believe that people are your greatest asset as a country. And Africa, if we were to become one country, would have 1.5 billion people. Automatically, guys, would be the largest country in terms of not only size, like I said, but also population. And I think the scale and the power of that, I think, would have greater influence in the UN, so that's the United Nations, would have a greater say in the World Trade Organization, would have more power in climate talks. All these things would matter because we would be representing 1.5 billion people. So there is some sense when I hear people say that, I'm like, okay, I see where you're coming from. Like, you're getting at something. And on top of all of that as well, I said people are your greatest resource, but speaking of just pure natural resources, we would have 30% of all global mineral reserves in the world, would have 90% of the platinum in the world. Platinum is used in catalysts, would have 70% of the cobalt in the world, and that is used in batteries, would have more than 50% of the gold in the world. That is major. That is major because we already have these resources. And my question is, if you look at the current GDP of Africa, again, if we were to become one country, would have a GDP of $2.6 trillion. That is nothing compared to the United States. The United States is 10 times and more what Africa holds as a continent. But Africa is obviously one of the leading continents in terms of natural resources. Some people argue it's Asia that leads. Some people argue it's Africa. I am biased, so I'm going to say Africa. And to me, it just doesn't make sense that our GDP is still lagging. And which is why, even despite all these pros and all these benefits of us uniting together, even our military would be stronger because now Nigeria and Algeria are doing absolutely amazing when it comes to their military. And if we combine ourselves together, we would have a stronger military than what we have as individual countries. However, despite all of that, I think it's important that we just take a step back. Let's not be too excited, guys. Let's take a step back and be like, okay, is this actually realistic? Is this something that would be feasible for the continent? Because like I was saying, if as individual countries, we've only managed to produce 2.6 trillion in GDP, we have no evidence that we have the capacity to handle 54 different nations. We simply don't have evidence for that. I know it hurts to hear that, but we simply don't have that evidence. And the very first thing is, it would be very challenging to bring us together because of our diversity. Africa is extremely diverse in terms of cultures. We are the most diverse continent in the world. So Africa has over 3,000 ethnic groups. We have more than 2,000 different languages spoken in the continent. How are you going to combine all those people? Tell me. Because some of you are like, oh yeah, but the US did it. The US had one language. They had one language, guys. They all spoke English. Okay. Some Africans to this day, we still are only learning English, some of us. And you people want to unite us into one. Now people would say, oh, Swahili could become the lingua franca of Africa. Don't piss me off. I'm a Swahili person. Don't piss me off. What do you mean Swahili should become the lingua franca of Africa? Do you think Swahili is actually representative of all 54 different nations, all the 3,000 plus ethnic groups of Africa? Don't you think that's alienating all the other tribes? Why shouldn't we make Zulu the lingua franca of Africa? Why not Yoruba? So I think these are things that we need to consider. I love what the AU is doing, that's the African Union, because they're saying, okay, we can come together as a continent, but let's not overlook other tribes. Let's not overlook what other countries have already established by themselves individually. So that is one. The other thing that would be very challenging is just governance, pure governance. Who would be the president of Africa? Okay, you want Africa to become one country. Who would be the president? For sure, I do not want Tinubu to be the president of Africa. I do not want Ramaphosa to be the president of Africa. I don't want Ruto to be I don't want Kagame to be the president of Africa. I want to be the president of Africa, thank you. But I think it would be very challenging to find one person to represent all of 1.5 billion of us. Everybody would want somebody from their tribe, from their country. They would want that representation. And at the same time, how are we going to vote? Because Seychelles has a population of 100k people. Nigeria has a population of 235 million people. Do you want the vote of Seychelles and Nigerians to matter the same way? Because that would be unfair. Seychelles are speaking for 100k people, and Nigerians are speaking for 235 million people. And if you do what the United States is doing, where you say the votes of Nigerians would matter more than those of Seychelles because there's more Nigerians, then Seychelles' views are never going to matter because Nigeria is bigger. So you have to think about all these things. It's not as easy as saying, oh yeah, we're Africans, we all look the same. First of all, we don't, but people argue that we do. Even if we did, it would be very complicated to go ahead and unite all these cultures and have them integrated into one. And that's just one aspect of it as well. When you speak of governance, you also have to consider that Africa is a mix of different political systems. Some are democracies, some are autocracies, some are monarchies. Now, democracy is what everybody knows, the rule of the people, by the people, for the people, with the people, across the people, towards the people, whatever you say. But then there's autocracies where countries like Eritrea, for example, is just power is concentrated in the hands of one person. There is monarchies, places like Eswatini and Morocco. Which political system would we use? Have you guys thought about all of this? Because this is not just any simple thing that you just get up on and you're like, yeah, Africa should be one, let's go. These are really complicated challenges that we need to tackle. So at the end of the day, I love what the AU has done, like I was saying initially, because the AU has said, okay, every country is going to remain sovereign. You do your thing. However, we're going to become one because we need to promote things like intercontinental trade. If you look at the European Union, 60% of the trade that happens in Europe happens between European countries. And then the 40% is them doing trade with countries outside their continent. But in Africa, only 15% of our trade is within the continent. Do you know how embarrassing that is, guys? Very embarrassing behavior, because that shows that we are not even able to cooperate with one another, which is why, despite the failures of communities like ECOWAS and the East African Community and SADC, I'm still not mad about it, because I'm like, these are actually promoting cooperation. We need to cooperate with one another to some extent. And I think one of the ways we can do that is actually easing how we're doing trade with one another. It would actually help us to facilitate trade between ourselves, because there are things that Tanzania has that other countries don't have. For example, do you guys have Tanzanites? Exactly, that's what I thought. So you need to promote Your English is not my first language, guys. It's literally my second language, and I speak multiple. So, anyways, I think we need to promote these trade unions within the continent because they're good. If we create more free zones of people trading, I've said this in one of my previous videos, Magat Wade, I'm a big fan. She talks about how Africa is so underdeveloped, and a lot of people would blame colonialism, would blame corruption. Some people would even say Africans have low IQ. Not that I support it, by the way. But she's saying a lot of people overlook the fact that Africa is extremely overregulated. And I think that's the issue here. I think a lot of us are feeling that we are not able to just communicate it, but Africa is so overregulated. To do trade in Africa, to be an entrepreneur in Africa, and you want to ship something, like I love a lot of Nigerian entrepreneurs. I see them on Instagram, on TikTok. A lot of Nigerians are starting businesses, and I'm like, yes, I want to support your businesses. But if you had to ship that thing from Nigeria to Tanzania, by the time it gets to Tanzania, it's over. The amount of fees that little thing would have incurred, only God knows. So I think we should promote intracontinental trade. If one country is doing really great, we open up doors for them to trade within the continent. And that way will increase each individual country's revenue, and it will actually make it easier for us to develop as a continent. So that is all I had to say. I think it's a good thing to say that Africa should unite, yes, but the idea of Africa becoming one country is just crazy work, guys. No, I'm not for it at all, because it's unrealistic, it's impractical, and it's actually insensitive to the diversity that Africa has as a continent. We can all dance to Amapiano, but we don't all have to be South Africans. We can all dance to Niger beats, but it doesn't mean we're all Nigerians. We can have this unity, we can have this sense of camaraderie, but it doesn't mean that we all need to become the United States of Africa. I think it's not a good idea at all. I will never support it. If you guys vote for me, the only way I will support the United States of Africa is if you guys want me to become your president, which I know you do, but it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. So thank you so much for watching. That's all the yapping that I wanted to do today. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. Don't forget to subscribe, because a lot of you are not subscribing. 800 returning viewers, and none of you guys are subscribing. It hurts me. We're on the road to 400 subscribers, so please subscribe, and you'll see me in the next video. Bye.